Welcome to On Our Way, a podcast about grief and loss. Beryl Botman is my name. As well as having to deal with your own grief, that of your children, other mourners, your in laws, the relations with the employer of the deceased also becomes important. When my husband died in the employ of Stellenbosch University, the situation of having to deal with mutual expectations and responsibilities arose. What I could expect from them, what I could accept from them, and what not became issues to deal with from the very start. I knew that I have to know what my rights are regarding employee benefits and employer obligations. It is important that in this kind of situation that the relevant people are informed through the right channels. And what I also found very helpful is the orientation of myself of accepting help and support when offered. This becomes a level of support that I never imagined possible before. I think looking back at the relationship with Stellenbosch University as the employer of Russell, what I valued was that there was an open channel of communication with whichever way they offered their help and support. And what I respected and appreciated even more was the way in which it was done with respect to me as the widow, to be the one who makes the decisions and takes the decisions and help them or guide them in the ways that they think they could support me. I knew that I had to take cognizance of Russell's position. I had to act in a way that is appropriate for the position that he was in. I had to negotiate my interactions, bearing in mind the relationships that he had with his staff and his colleagues. Russell was the leader, was the manager of the university, and people reported to him. I had to remember that was his position, and I had to treat them with the respect that he treated them. I had to bear in mind Russell's personality in dealing with his employer. Stellenbosch University is not my employer, it was his employer. And I had to deal with that institution according to how I understand he dealt with the institution where he was the head. Looking back over the period of 5 years that I am reflecting on, I am so acutely aware that there are differences in perspective and approaches to handling death, and not more so in an institution of higher learning that Stellenbosch University is. And I had to also be aware of differences in understanding and feelings towards Russell as a person. There are those who supported him and accepted his leadership, had respect for him, for his integrity, his knowledge about higher education. And there are those who had no respect for him, did not accept his leadership. So I had to be aware of that. I have also become aware that I had to accept gestures of kindness, which there was in abundance. It was actually overwhelming. The ways in which I was supported, carried, and loved by the Stellenbosch community. that is staff, students, and every other staff member associated with him. Now, death brings much administration, and the role of the employer is very significant in this. When a person dies in the employ of an institution or company, then there are certain issues that they need to deal with, and you, as the widow, need to know about this. I've become even more aware upon reflecting on the relationship with Russell's employer that I am so grateful that the relationship between Russell and I was of such a nature that I knew what his contract was about. I knew what forms would have had to be completed. I knew what the responsibilities of the university would be. I knew that forms will have to be completed, and one of the important ones is regarding tax responsibilities. Not very long after the death, a tax certificate needs to be issued by the employer for the executor of the estate of the deceased. So a widow should know that and expect that. As a widow, I knew which funds Russell contributed to and what payments should be expected and the amounts that should be expected. You also need to know if your husband has made any contributions towards funeral benefits. So, all in all, you have to know the conditions of employment of your spouse so that when in the very sad experience of losing your spouse, you know what to expect and what is due to you. And that is mutual. You have to know what salary is due. If he died at the end of the month and he hasn't received his salary yet, you must know that it belongs to the estate or what is due to him. How the medical aid works, who was the beneficiaries, who continues to be beneficiary, and how that works, and how the medical aid, if you have access to medical aid, how that changes and what needs to be done to accommodate the changes. For example, if the one spouse was a dependent on the other spouse's medical aid, then a new medical aid needs to be taken out for the longest living spouse. And there are forms to be forwarded. The department of people that would be able to assist with all these kinds of issues is the Human Resources Department. And so you would know if there are questions about issues of pension fund, medical aid, salary, and maybe leave payments that's still due. The Human Resources Department would be able to assist, should be able to assist. You have to know about any pension funds or any other funds that your husband or your wife has contributed to, so that you can complete the appropriate forms and expect the appropriate amounts of monies due to you and your children if that has been specified. Know about all the funds that your spouse has contributed to. In general, be aware that the employer follow general financial principles. For example, be sure that when your pension fund or any other fund that payment that is due to you is paid into the account of the employer. It accrues interest on every single day. Be sure that you receive that interest when the payment is made. So there would be a different amount from the amount that the insurance or the pension fund or whatever fund pays to the amount that you receive, your children receive in their accounts, which means that the interest have been added for every single day. On a level with dealing with people, one needs to bear in mind that colleagues are also grieving. As a widow, I think it important that I offer support in terms of making time, finding time to listen to their stories and to comfort, and also be available to attend memorials that is being arranged by the employer. Also, I think it is important, if you know that what kind of a person your spouse was at his place of work, that should there be occasions of honor and you are invited, although it might take much of you, although it is sad, although it makes you cry, it is important to attend these occasions because looking back, they serve as healing moments that might not feel like that at the time, but looking back, they can become a healing moments. So in general, I am glad that I opened myself up to participate in any events as far as was possible for me. Open to participate and open to listen and make time for the colleagues at your spouse's place of work. In my case, the employer was involved in the funeral arrangements in the sense that they did all the arrangements, but upon my instruction alone. Be sure, if that should be the case that you have to face, be clear in setting boundaries and be clear in giving your spouse the funeral that you think he or she deserves. And what I found very important is my responsibility was to remember to write thank you notes or any likewise gestures. It means such a lot to the colleagues of your late husband or partner. I remember quite recently I met somebody in a coffee shop, came up to me, and this is now almost 10 years ago. She says, "Thank you for the thank you note." And I couldn't remember because I said many thank you notes, but it just thinking about that note became significant for her. Although I wrote hundreds of thank you notes, her particular one meant something, so much so that after almost 10 years, she could come up to me where she saw me in public and thank me for that thank you note. All these kinds of things that one does or that you feel you have to do after your husband's passing, including the actions and the relationships with the people at your husband's place of employ. They are all healing moments. Looking back, I find that they are all healing moments, but that does not mean that every single experience was healing. There were hurtful ones as well. But when dealing not only with the employer, but in general with a relationship, you have to choose your battles and you must know when it is that you must make it plain when you disagree, with anything that is being done and make it clear. And on the other hand, also show appreciation for things that you agree with and you find pleasing and helpful. Looking back, also expect to be sensitive about what is said about your spouse. Expect to be sensitive of what is done in response to his death. It is not always, you don't always agree with whatever people say or do in response to his death, but in preparation of the death of your spouse, and be aware that you will be sensitive, and it's not something to be apologetic about, but just know that that is something that you have to be aware of. And a way of responding is maybe, if possible, to delay response. But I know it's not, when you are in the moment of grief and in a moment of anger, then that is not always possible. But try as far as possible. There are many instances that I thought when I'm reading again how I reacted to what people said and did, I could have been more soft and gentle in my response had I just delayed that response. Because also it is important to remember that in some instances you still continue your relationships where it's appropriate. Continue the relationships with the staff and the colleagues of your spouse. And so, in dealing with the employer, is a balance between what is important in terms of what is expected, what is their obligations, and what you expect in terms of support and in terms of administration after the death of your spouse. And on a personal level, be open to also console and listen and be sensitive to their grief, to those who are grieving. Now I would like to read to illustrate the goodwill and support from members of staff at Stellenbosch University with two short extracts from Without You. On page 16, I'm reading, Monique, your medical worker and executive assistant, has presented me with another issue. I must decide about whether I go to Scotland after your funeral. Oh no, definitely not, is my initial answer. But I would think about it. Do you remember? Our arrangements for Scotland have already been made. We would first go to Aberdeen and stay there for a few days, and then we would move on from there. Everything has been arranged for our trip. We were so looking forward to it. Well, I will think about it. Thinking is about all I can do. I cannot stop thinking. And another extract relating to this very issue on page 26. Roxanne is not feeling well. I let her to lie on the single bed that I have already offered Phoebe. Monique is working on the arrangements for our trip to Scotland. Did I tell you that I have decided to go to Scotland? Roxanne still needs a visa. My UK visa is still valid. Samantha at your office is helping with this. She has completed Roxanne's application online. With the help of the wonderful, understanding, compassionate, and indulgent British Consul General, Samantha has managed to get an appointment for Roxanne for tomorrow. So, on an employment level as well as on a personal level, the relationships between you and your spouse's colleagues and the staff is important, and you have to honor that. You have been listening to Dealings with the Employer on my podcast On Our Way with Beryl Botman. Walk tall, tell it all. You've been listening to On Our Way with Beryl Botman. You can purchase my books online on Amazon, Take a Lot, and at bookstores like Exclusive Books, Bargain Books, independent bookstores, and Barnes & Noble internationally. To connect with me, please follow me on Facebook to learn more about my book launches and talks. You can write to me at beryl.botman60@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.